Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to the Recovery Couch, where today I'm honored to sit down with Maddie Andrews. Maddie's journey began with childhood trauma and grew into years of substance abuse and mental health struggles after facing the challenges of dual diagnosis, a near fatal stay in the ICU, and the weight of broken family dynamics. Maddie found healing through holistic treatment, through faith, and through the support of community. She's now an advocate for mental health awareness and the founder of a nonprofit that inspires hope through kindness, empathy, and the simple but powerful mantra, one day at a time. Sit back, relax, enjoy this conversation with Maddie right after a word from our sponsor. This episode of the Recovery Couch is brought to you by Greg Swartz at Remax Victory and Affiliates. Whether you're buying or selling your home, Greg brings heart, hustle, and honesty to every deal. Call Greg at 937-477-8975 today. What is up, everybody? So excited for today's conversation with my guest, Maddie Andrews. It is the summertime. I'm feeling fine, and this is where we live life one day at a time. So, Maddie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so let's just get straight into it and start with the stuff that's probably difficult to talk about. Tell us your story. What's your story?
Right. So my story involves not just substance use history, but extensive mental health history. And the two really began to intertwine when I was 4 years old. I had an extremely traumatic experience happen, and I reached out to an adult who shut me down, told me it was my fault when it wasn't, and told me if I said anything, I would be in trouble. So I didn't disclose to my parents and developed PTSD, and some of the symptoms that come along with that is when you don't sleep. So I would have panic attacks at night. So my mother started medicating me to make me sleep when I was around 5. And I still struggled, and on the night she didn't give me the medication, I would sit in my room and have a panic attack, and I knew where she kept it. So at that early age, I started taking it by the handful because, my parents were amazing, right? Like, I don't want to discount that, but especially my mom, was a big believer that pills are the answer to life, and she really instilled that in me. Eventually, my father caught me when I had the pill bottle in my hand and told me that was wrong. But that was just the tip of the iceberg for me. And in middle school, I started developing what's called schizoaffective bipolar type, which means I have symptoms of both schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. So I was having delusions, paranoia, mood swings, hallucinations, and because of that early age of someone telling me you can't talk about these things, I really kept it inside until I was 14. And I read a magazine article about a young woman with OCD, and I happen to also have compulsive behaviors and compulsive thinking. And I told my mom, and she was very receptive. She took me to our neuropsychiatrist who diagnosed me with OCD. And the original conversation in my household was medication versus no medication. My mother was very for it. My father was very against it. But again, I had been coached my whole life, pills are the answer. I'm not saying it's wrong to take mental health meds. I have to take them for the rest of my life because of my schizoaffective. But it really snowballed when I was 16. I had my diagnosis changed to mood disorder, not otherwise specified, and generalized anxiety. Times were a little different. Prescribed were a little different. My mom pushed for me to be given a prescription of Xanax. And I didn't know what Xanax was. And my mom was giving me her Klonopin then and wanted me to have my own prescription of Xanax, and the doctor agreed. And I was trying to mask such debilitating mental health symptoms that I wasn't articulating, and I found that when I took a Xanax, what I thought at the time was it makes me feel better, but what I didn't realize at that age was I was creating two problems. And so then when I was 17, I had my wisdom teeth cut out, and I ended up with dry socket, which was very painful. My mother again told me what to tell a doctor, and they prescribed me a ton of opiates, like a ton of opiates. And so not only was I taking the opiates, I was taking Xanax on top of it, had begun drinking, and it really started this vicious cycle of self-medication that almost killed me. I ended up becoming manic in college and developing symptoms like self harming. I had suicidal ideations, and my hallucinations became so bad that I was unable to leave my house. And so I thought, hey, if I take this pill or get drunk, then maybe the voices will stop. And then when I was 21, it kind of came to the light what I was doing. So I had dropped out of college because of my mental health and substance use, and I was working, but I wasn't living, and it wasn't healthy, and I wasn't working on my mental health at all. And I was a runner. When I am using or unwell mentally, I'm a runner. And so I had kind of just dipped and was staying at some friend's house and getting high and drunk. And my parents caught wind of what I was doing and had like a brawl with me. Like my dad wanted to kick my butt and my mom was crying, and it was this fiasco, which like I understand they didn't want me to seem that way, but my parents were addicts too, right? Like they were in active addiction at that time, and my dad had the habit of saying, Maddie, never drink while he's drinking a Jack and Coke. And my mom was a drinker, and she had a lot of physical ailments, and they prescribed her copious amounts of opiates to deal with it. So she was highly addicted to pills. Not because they prescribed it and she overindulged, but she did have significant pain, but that's a whole nother conversation, the overprescription of opiates. So we're having this conversation. They want to kick my butt when they're over there using too, but I understood that something was wrong here. Like maybe I do need to change something. And I told them, I said, I don't know how to stop. Like I have no idea what to do. So they drove me to a rehab facility that had taken care of some other extended family members. And I remember going there, and my mom had taken hold of my prescriptions. I was prescribed Clonopin at the time, and she was like dosing me as we go because I was gonna DT. And when we got there, she
Explain what
still had my
DP is to the
bottle.
people who don't know. That's those are
I was
tremors.
gonna detox.
Yeah.
So I could have a seizure. There was a lot of there's a lot of bad side effects when you come off drugs and alcohol without under medical care. It can when you're detoxing off things like alcohol, it can kill you when you don't have the proper treatment to do it. And so we go to this rehab center, and my mom has my bottles, and I'm in the back room getting assessed, and I'm telling them I was on opiates, benzos, alcohol, marijuana, and over the counter drugs. And I'm telling them this, and they're like, I don't know, because I also have co occurring, meaning I have mental health diagnosis and substance use history, which a lot of rehab facilities can't treat. They're not equipped for the mental health aspect. And so they were kind of nervous about that.
So this is
But
what they
I remember,
call in substance abuse facilities a dual diagnosis, correct?
yes,
Okay.
yes, yes. So I have dual diagnosis, and then I told them everything I was on, and they said we can't properly detox you. They didn't have the medical, the level of medical care that I would need to safely come off all of the different types of drugs and alcohol, and they turned me away. And
How old are you at
I
this
didn't
point,
understand.
Maddie?
I was 21 years old. I had just turned 21. So I they gave my mom a list of like other treatment facilities in the state and in surrounding areas. And I went home, and my mom was still, giving me my prescription little bits at a time to keep me alive. And
And when you say alive,
I
you mean
woke up to,
so you don't have seizures or life
right,
threatening withdrawal.
right. I could have died. I could have had a seizure, blacked out, hit my head, and died if she hadn't done that. It's it's I when they detox you in a center, they're giving you medications to help with these symptoms, and they're monitoring you. So they're keeping you safe through medical intervention. And I didn't have that at home. So my mom, all she knew to do was keep a baseline of substances in my system so that I didn't have those side effects from coming off of them. And so
Which
she
is actually
called
the
every
right thing
place.
to do when somebody's in a crisis of potentially fatal withdrawal, correct?
Right, because
That's
if
what a
she
doctor
didn't,
would have done.
Right, because she didn't have the medical capacity. Like, she was a nurse, but she didn't have the drugs I needed to withdraw off of, and she didn't have the medical equipment to monitor me, and she didn't have the medical knowledge to ensure that I could do it safely. Like, you have to do that in a hospital. You have to do that at a proper rehab center. Like, this is not something you can safely do at home. So I ended up going. She woke me up the next morning. She's like, either pack for the beach or pack for the mountains. And I was so naive. I was like, cool, I'm going on vacation. And so I packed a bathing suit and snow boots and like 5 bags. I thought I was going on a trip. And I ended up going to the beach in North Carolina and at Wilmington Treatment Center. And I was so young and naive thinking what this was going to be like. And I remember walking in and they handed me, after I did an assessment, they handed me like a small cup of pills. And I didn't know what they were. And I took them. And the next thing I remember, it's like days to a week later, and I'm in the facility. I have no memory of my initial detox. Um, I don't remember it at all. And I remember I had met somebody in the waiting room, and she was my roommate. And I was like, "How did I meet you?" And she's like, "We've been this time." And I'm like, I have no idea. Um, but the problem was they
What
took
did
me
they
off
give you,
detox.
Maddie? What did they? Did you ever
I,
find out what those pills
I
were?
have no idea. I have no idea. But the thing about it was they took me off detox. That's when I could start remembering, but I wasn't done detoxing, right? So I'm in the facility one day and I'm like, my eyes hurt. My bones hurt. I'm like, what's going on? And this girl looked at me. She goes, your pupils are your whole eyeball. I was like, what? I was like, it really hurts. My eyes really hurt. I was like, my whole body hurts. They were like, you need to go see the nurse. So they took me out of detox into regular treatment, but I wasn't done detoxing. And I do know for the pain at that time, they gave me fentanyl patches. That was my first exposure to fentanyl. Um, and I do
21
know
years
at the
old.
time, 21 years old, they gave me fentanyl patches because I was in such pain. I don't know what else they gave me, but I ended up getting off, and a conversation around my care was, do we use mat treatment or does she just get completely clean? Like, not to say mat treatment isn't clean at all. Mat treatment is great. But I'm saying, like, did they want to use that on me? And
For the
I said
listeners,
no.
the MAT treatment is medical assisted treatment, right? So where they introduce
Right.
maybe like a synthetic opioid to get you off of narcotic opioid, things of that nature, correct?
Right. So, common thing you might hear when it comes to mat treatment is methadone, Suboxone, things like that. Those are medications used in medical assisted treatment. And they save a lot of lives. You know, they prevent a lot of relapses, they prevent a lot of overdoses. It's very beneficial for a lot of people. But I didn't want that. So, you know, the initial time in rehab was hard. I didn't know up from down. I was so young and I was going to NA in the rehab facility, and in one of the meetings, not an NA meeting, but like a general meeting, they said they had a new shot you could take that made you resistant to certain drugs and alcohol. So, like, if you drank or took a pill or a drug, you wouldn't feel the effects. And I was really interested in this. I was like, okay. But then somebody told me, you know, for people like me, that could be dangerous too, right? Because if I'm chasing that high and I'm going to keep going, you can still OD. So I chose not to do that either. And I spent 28 days there. And along the journey, I thought I was just going home. And I told my counselor there that at my house, people were using. Um, and they told me there's no way I'm going home. And I was like, what do you mean? So I said, I don't have anywhere else to go. I lost my job coming here. Like, I have nothing. And they were like, we're going to find you a sober living facility. And I was like, okay. So they started talking about Oxford houses, which are like three-quarter living houses. It's a group of people in recovery who live together and work and create a community and go to meetings. And there's house rules and regulations. And I didn't know what to think about this, but they got me a phone interview for one near where I lived. And I got in. And so when I got out of treatment, I went there and I was terrified. I was 21. All the girls were a lot older than me and had a lot more experience in the rooms and had a lot more knowledge than I did. And so they really took me under their wing in that house. And they taught me what it's like to be an adult because let's be honest here, I hadn't been an adult yet. I was too busy getting high and drunk to be an adult. So,
Let me interrupt for 1 second, Maddie. So, because I want to make sure I got something clear on this story because we're flying through your timeline. Now, you first started taking prescription drugs at what age?
so I started taking over the counter at 4 and I started taking prescription drugs at 16.
Okay, so, and over the counter, like was it like cold medicine or what? Like
It was like
what?
sleeping pills, like
Ah, like Tylenol
Dramamine,
PM.
Benadryl.
Yeah,
Yeah, but when you're 4 and you start taking handfuls of that stuff and teaching yourself that that's the answer, that's not very good.
right. And then you had the two. Your parents were both um, the taking pills also. So that's what you were seeing
Yeah,
on a regular basis.
yeah, my parents had prescription medication and they were big drinkers and my parents were great people. They worked, they functioned, they loved me, but kids a lot of times will emulate what they see. Like, and when I was in high school, my mom would be like, "Oh, you have a cold? Here's a shot. Like, let's just take this alcohol. It'll help your cough." And my dad never pushed things on that late for me, but I also saw what he did. And in my early years of recovery, he was trying to get sober too. So I would suggest a meeting and he would be resistant. And eventually, he and I would kind of go back and forth on the recovery journey, but we ended up getting clean together. And I was really thankful for that. He got sober and started attending AA and was able to function at a much higher level.
From and that's awesome. That's an awesome part of the story. I'm super glad to hear that,
Right,
Maddie. But so from 4 to 16, were the sleeping pills kind of pretty common ordeal?
right.
Yeah. So basically, from 4 until 21, um, you were accustomed to, and 4 is so young, Maddie, so young, right? So you've been conditioned from 4 years old until 21, where you were at in your story at the Oxford Treatment Center. You were conditioned to cope with life via a pill.
Yes, I mean, even if I like fell and scraped my knee or told my mom I had a headache, she's like, "Go take 5 ibuprofen." What? Who? Nobody needs to take 5 ibuprofen, much less an 8-year old. Like, her mentality very much was that pills are the answer to a lot in life.
Copy. And then so here you are at 21 at this Oxford Treatment Center, and that's all you've ever known. And that's not really your fault, honestly. 4 is way too young to be introduced to something like that. And then you have these women in recovery who are taking you under their wing. What does that look like? What do you start learning from these women? And, um, and where does kind of your life start to go from there?
Right. So I was learning to change people's and places and things. I was learning to not be afraid, but I think the biggest hurdle for me was I was learning to be sober, but I was not yet close at all to learning to find mental health recovery. So while I was reintegrating into the world with new people, places, and things, I was still dealing with really severe symptoms.
So let me ask
And
this, Maddie. So you're being treated at this point for a single diagnosis while you already know you have a dual diagnosis. You're being treated for substance abuse while you know that you have substance abuse and mental health that you need to be treated for.
it was like two worlds for me. So I had the world where they were diagnosing me with mental health, and then I had the world where they were diagnosing me with substance use, but they weren't coming together. Like I wasn't lying with my doctors. They knew I went to rehab. They knew I had a drug problem. They knew I liked to drink, and they knew I was an addict. But they weren't melding the two together enough. And they never shied away from being willing to prescribe me medications. And, it took me a long time to be able to say, I am an addict. And even with my mom. So I went to Oxford House, I got clean, I turned my life around. And I was sober for a few years. And then my mom got in my ear and she's like, "You're not an addict. You're just mentally unwell. That's two different things. You can drink, Maddie." And I was like, well, if my mom is saying this must be true. Like maybe I am just mentally ill. And I'm not an addict, and I picked up drinking here and there, but pretty quickly I realized I do not have the ability to have a glass of wine. I'm going to drink until I black out. And I recognized this and I stopped and I got sober again. Um, I think when you have dual diagnosis, it can be hard that there's two things that you have to accept and that they can interplay. Mental health and substance use so often go hand in hand, whether it be something serious like mine or anxiety and depression. When we feel these symptoms, a lot of the times before we learn to get into the rooms and learn about recovery, we're going to cope with these things because we think in the moment they're making us feel better.
This episode of the Recovery Couch is brought to you by J.B. Davis at Performance Chrysler Jeep Dodge Ram. For integrity, service, and unbeatable deals, ask for J.B. in Centerville and tell them the Recovery Couch sent you. Absolutely. There are coping mechanisms for, as opposed to dealing with whatever, life is, curveballs life's thrown us, the challenges of having a mental health condition, and sometimes even anxiety and depression are serious mental health conditions, but they can get as severe as, schizophrenia, bipolar. There's a myriad of mental health disorders that do go hand in hand with substance abuse disorder. So how do you begin navigating your mental health disorders? You've been to the treatment centers, the Oxford House, and the doctors and you all agree there's substance abuse disorder. But when do you start dealing with the mental health stuff?
Right, so by the time I was 23, I had been hospitalized for my mental health 4 times.
You said four
Suicidal
times?
AD. 4 times. I had been hospitalized 4 times at 23. I was self-harming. I was feeling suicidal. I was manic, which means I'm super impulsive, super hyper, and your inhibitions pretty much go out the window when you have mania. And then there was the flip side where I would become chronically depressed. And then I had the psychosis along with that. So I had delusions, paranoia, hallucinations, and I was going to therapy. And the doctor I saw for 15, 20 years, her biggest thing to me was pills are the answer. I'm going to pump you full of so many medications. I'm going to max them out. And I mean, you have to remember, I had that mentality from a young age. Pills are the way to fix things. So I wasn't relying on any kind of holistic measure. Like, I tried therapy, but I wasn't receptive because I thought pills were the end all be all. So I really did not even start to find mental health recovery until I almost died in 2023. I was in the ICU, dead, heart failure, lungs collapse from doctor negligence. And it wasn't until after that I decided to take total control of my life and completely turn it around.
So let's stop there, Maddie. Tell us, how did the doctor negligence lead to being brain dead, lung failure,
Right.
heart? Yeah, all how did that come about?
So in April 2023, my doctor called about a new medication. I was on like 10 to 15. So I'm like, whatever, what's one more? I wasn't living my life at all. I call it living to survive. And I said, sure. So all of a sudden, for the first time in years, I could process emotions. I wasn't numb. I was motivated. I was losing weight, like all these wonderful things, and I began to thrive. And so she started reducing my other medications. But when you live with schizoaffective bipolar type, you have to treat mania, depression, and psychosis. So the drug she had just put me on was FDA regulated to treat psychosis and depression, but she pulled me off my mania medication. Well, slowly but surely, I became manic. And when I become manic, I become psychotic. So I didn't realize it initially, but when I did, it was a little too late. And I realized that I was in a severe manic state and a severe psychotic state. And I reached out. I said, hey, this is happening. I think I need some help. And she kind of cast it aside. So I kept working, kept living. And so that was April when she changed the meds. And in November, I said, this is unsafe. I said, I'm going to self advocate. You're going to write me out of work and I'm going to get some help or I'm going to die. And she was like, okay. So she wrote not only me out of work, but my husband because I couldn't care for myself anymore. So my husband was working from home. And her first course of action, even though I was sober, was to write me prescriptions for Xanax, Ativan, and gabapentin as much as I wanted.
Two
I was
different
psychotic.
benzos.
Did 3 sedatives, 2 of them being benzos. She never told me she was doing this. I went and picked up a medication from the pharmacy and took it. Then I did, it was a generic name. I didn't recognize it. It was Xanax. And so when you're
What
manic
milligram?
and psychotic, it was only one, but she gave me a ton of them.
And how
A
many
ton of them.
milligrams of the Ativan?
One, but it was so many pills. It was like it was basically saying just sedate the crap out of yourself as much as you want to me, because I could have I could have taken two, three, four, and I would have never run out. So I started taking it as prescribed. I'm like, I don't know what else to do. And it wasn't helping. And then I became so sick that I was like, maybe if I take one more, the voices will stop. Maybe if I take one more, the hallucinations, I'll stop seeing these scary things. And one more led to two more, led to me standing in the kitchen, falling backwards, blacking out because I was so high. And I totally relapsed. I totally relapsed. And I began abusing the crap out of it. And she was still prescribing. It was never a situation where I called her and said, hey, I ran out. Like, I had as much as I wanted. So that didn't work, obviously.
Now, and you, Maddie,
And
had
so
admitted that you have had issues with possibly going into DTs or seizures. Like at that point of benzo withdrawal earlier in your life, was that ever a fear at this point in time with this prescription?
I was so sick that I was not cognitively aware enough to think about that. I was so psychotic. And along the way, I wasn't even able to do my own meds because I was so sick. My husband took control and started giving me the dosage that was on the bottle because he had to dole out all my meds because I was in such a psychotic state. That's why, and I mean, I couldn't be left alone. Like, I couldn't care for myself at all.
When you say psychotic state, like you're talking about psychosis, or are you talking about sedated?
I was in psychosis. I was seeing things that weren't there. I was hearing things that weren't there. I was feeling things that weren't there. I was having delusions. I was having paranoia. I was very sick. That's why I had to be written out of work. And
Now,
on top of the psychosis, I was manic.
and I just for clarity, do you think it at this point, like I know the psychosis was, what's it called when a doctor, shoot, man, I just slipped my mind, but diagnosed you with the psychosis before you were on the
Right.
1 milligram Ativan and the 1 milligram Xanax, but at this point in time, while you are on the 1 milligrams Ativan and Xanax, do you feel like this was drug induced psychosis, or do you feel like this was non drug induced psychosis?
I think I was pretty psychotic when she put me on it, but I don't think they helped. Like, I can't say for certain, but it could have exacerbated because pretty quickly thereafter it snowballed so bad where I couldn't use a toilet. I couldn't talk. I couldn't swallow. Like all of my basic functions stopped happening.
Is this the point where you call the doctor and say, "Hey, like this, there's some negligence going on. You need to figure
It
something
gets
out."
worse.
It gets worse.
So she decided that this wasn't working, the sedatives. Like she kept the sedatives, but then she upped a medication called lithium. And lithium is a heavy metal used to treat bipolar disorder. It's a very effective medication, but one of the parts of taking it is they have to get blood work periodically to check your levels, to check your kidneys, to check your liver. And she did not. And I became so sick that, like I said, I couldn't talk, swallow. I was in diapers. And my husband would place me on video call with her, and she would see me unable to talk and drooling, and she would say, okay, rest, see you in 2 weeks. Yeah.
Dang.
So one day my husband was going to take me to therapy, and he got me in his car, and my therapist called and said, you missed the appointment. And I couldn't see life with my eyes very well at this point. I only saw hallucinations. And I kind of saw my yard and I kind of saw my house, but it was different. And I was very, very, very afraid for the things I was seeing. It was very scary. And It was causing a lot of problems in my marriage. I started seeing these white specks of light around my eyes. My skin was crawling. I was vomiting. And when I missed therapy, I tried really hard and I got out the words, take me to the hospital. And my husband took me to a mental hospital. And when I came in, I was stumbling and they asked me to sign my name. I couldn't read or write. I was covered in vomit. And they were like, whoa, when they heard I was on lithium, they were like, this is way bigger than what I can do. And so they called an ambulance, but the ambulance never came. So my husband got me released to him and rushed me to the ER. And that's where I started fighting for my life.
So that's where you were brain dead, lungs
Right.
collapsed.
So they
So
gave me fluids. That's the first course of action with lithium toxicity. But when they give you so many fluids, it can enlarge your heart and create it. It started to fail. It was enlarged and failing. And when they continue fluids, when your heart's failing, it flushes into your lungs. So the bottom half of both my lungs collapse. Then they called poison control back and they're like, try dialysis. So they gave me a round of dialysis, still there. So they gave me a second round of dialysis and they finally got the lithium out, but the problem was I wasn't responsive. I was like a vegetable. So they did an EEG on my brain, which showed very little brain activity. And when you have lithium toxicity, there's a disorder called silent syndrome that can come along with it, which for me looked like I was going to regress even more and be like a vegetative state for the rest of my life. And I stayed like that for about 10 days before I started to try to show signs of life.
so what does that look like, Maddie? You're 10 days after you're laying in basically ICU,
Yeah, I was in ICU.
and then all of a sudden you come to. I'm guessing you still have some of the symptoms of your previous mental health diagnoses, the psychosis, the mania, the what is it, bipolar schizophrenia. Um,
Yeah.
but
It wasn't, it was,
at this point, are you
go ahead.
starting to think like, okay, medicine's not the answer? Is that what I'm gathering here?
It took me a while to get there because my recovery was slow. So when I woke up, I couldn't talk. PT was teaching me how to walk. I didn't know what a toilet was. I couldn't read. I couldn't write. I couldn't use a cell phone. So I went to the mental hospital and I taught myself how to write my name there. I taught myself what a toilet was. And they were talking years for me able to relearn all my skills. And I have amnesia. So part of my fall and winter is gone. And I had no short term memory when I got home. But when I did read my medical records and did learn what happened to me, I said, this is it. My life has got to change. I have cheated death and I have relied on these drugs for so long. And obviously, this is not the way. Like, I've got to advocate. I've got to look into holistic measures. I've got to find treatment that isn't just relying on a medication. I've got to find a new doctor. Like, this is the turning point in my life. And it's not just about, I didn't look at it a perspective of just me, right? Like, I didn't want anybody else to go through what I went through. So I dedicated my life in that moment to promote healing, not just for myself, but for other people in my community as well.
And I can tell just based off of your vocabulary, Maddie, that like you are very intelligent. So to go from being in a position where you didn't even know what a toilet was to today being able to advocate for mental health, substance abuse disorder, dual diagnosis, is super impressive. So when did you start? I know you just walked us through like what it looked like, that recovery from I can't do these pills or anymore. When did you go from just like, I know I can't have this medicine in my life to I want to I want to be a voice of reason and a voice of hope for others who have been through similar shit that I have.
Right. So 3 months after coming home, I went back to work full time, and the difference was I wasn't silent anymore. Hey, my name is Maddie. I have schizoaffective, and I have substance use history, and it is what it is. Like, I'm not ashamed. And they met me with warmth and compassion. So I was like, if I can be honest here, why can't I be honest in the rest of the world? Because there might be somebody out there who needs to hear this. and maybe I can change somebody's perspective on these things. So I started speaking at like events and in public, and it was going pretty well. So in 4 months after coming home, I said, let's make some bigger change here. So I started my own nonprofit, and our mission is mental health awareness, education, and community support. I run free support groups through the nonprofit. I do public speaking, and that still wasn't enough for me. So in 2024, I applied to the top four social work graduate programs in the country, and that's where I go to school now. And I'm working on my MSW to become an advocate. I want to work on policy change. I want to work on bigger change for my community because, I really have a hard time with the way stigma is held around mental health and substance use. And a lot of our policies on these things are not equitable. And a lot of our services for these things are not affordable or accessible. So I've kind of taken it on as my life's mission to make these policies and programs affordable, accessible, and equitable.
I absolutely love that. Super well said, Maddie. And that is quite unbelievable. Everything, that last piece there, your nonprofit, and having better resources for the people that need them at a more resourceful price is exactly what I think the recovery world needs. And so, yeah, I commend your work on that. When did it go from you understanding like this life isn't the way to how long did it take you before you were like, I need to tell my story in the entirety without leaving out the fact that I was taking sleeping medication at 4, the fact that I was, on prescription medication at 16, the fact that I was diagnosed as a substance abuse disorder as a drug addict at 21, because there's a lot of shame and guilt attached with that. And you just admitted in your nonprofit that you want to get rid of the stigma. That I'm sure was still there in your life when you
Yes.
started to speak and advocate for what you're speaking and advocating for. How did that look going from, okay, I don't care what anybody has to say, this is the truth, this is what happened, and what did that look like?
It wasn't overnight, right? Like, I would share, like, the people I initially shared with knew I was in the hospital and knew why. So I felt okay saying, okay, I have bipolar disorder, which turned into, okay, I really have schizoaffective disorder, which means I have symptoms of both bipolar and schizophrenia, which turned into, hey, I also have substance use disorder, and that's okay. Like, I was like testing the waters of comfortability because when you go your whole life hiding all of this, it's not something you're just going to jump out necessarily in public and spill your guts out all at one time. But the more I do it, the easier it gets. And I don't do it for attention. I don't do it for praise. I do it so that one person knows they're not alone. Because this can be a lonely journey. Thinking you're the only one in the world going through this is not good. I want someone to hear this and know recovery and hope are very real, and you can get there too.
Amen, Maddie. Yeah, you're preaching right now, sister, and I love it. So, tell us a little bit more about this nonprofit and what you're aiming to do, aside from generating like more equitable resources, and where can the listeners find more about your nonprofit?
Right. So the name of the nonprofit is J&E Support Group.
Spell
What we
that out
do
for
right
them.
now, J and sign E Support Group. So our website is www.jesupport.org, and we're on all social media. And we do right now is we do online advocacy. We're registered as an advocacy nonprofit, but we also offer free, 100% free support groups to our community. We started with an online group for anyone living with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or schizoaffective disorder. It is still operational on Thursday nights. And now we have 2 in person general mental health umbrella groups. Um, One of the spaces that they let us use, the spaces donated, is actually a recovery resource center. And I'm a big believer that mental health and substance use can go hand in hand. So when you come to our groups, it's not just about mental health. Like, what are you using to cope? And is it drugs and alcohol? And how can we get you sober? And I'm also a peer support specialist. That's how I facilitate these groups. So in my work in peer support, I work with substance use and I work with unhoused and I work with mental illness. I work on a whole range of things. And, it's very rewarding. It's very rewarding.
Well, Maddie, I can't really begin to praise you enough for not just going back and revisiting your journey through a lot of difficulty, and then coming out on the other side clean, but having the wherewithal to gain such an intelligent understanding of, like, what substance abuse and what mental health diagnosis and what dual diagnosis is doing, like within these communities, and how it affects not just the person in it, but the families, and how that there just has to be a heart for it. Because these people
Right.
are typically most of the people I know that I've met through treatment and treatment centers and recovery centers and jail and prison are good people, with
You
a
have
lot
to
of
be.
pain and trauma, and not so great coping mechanisms. And that's, I
Right.
think, what I'm kind of gathering from your story too, and why you have a heart for trying to help those people. So, Maddie, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Is there anything else that you kind of want to include?
I think what I like to just express is that kindness is free, right? Like when you hear stories like this, or when someone's vulnerable enough to express that they live with substance use or they live with mental illness, meet them with kindness, empathy, compassion, and grace. They're brave to talk about this, and we need to support them into finding recovery, not bring them down.
Amen to that. Yeah. Celebrate the bravery, as opposed to sometimes when we hear some traumatic stuff, I think it touches a nerve in people, Maddie.
Yes.
It gets too close to their trauma, and then they don't know how to react, as opposed to, how we just are trying to encourage people right now how to react with, like, hey, celebrate that bravery of, like, thank you for being honest with me. I'm here for you.
A
I'm
lot of
with you.
people I think a lot of people don't accept what hasn't necessarily touched them, and even if it has touched them, it might be something they're ready to admit yet. So it's easy for them to hold stereotypes and brush these things off and not see it as an important issue, but it is an important issue.
Amen. Well, so one last question, Maddie, before we get off here. So let's say we're going to create this guy. His name's Joe. I've done this once before, and Joe is just coming straight out of recovery. He was in a treatment center for 28 days, and he has to rebuild his entire life. But he wants to do it, and he wants to do it without substances, right? But he's on probation. He don't have a license. He doesn't have a job. What kind of advice would you give to Joe?
I think the first thing I would say is one day at a time, right? Because we can't come out and think everything's going to be fixed magically. Like we burned a lot of bridges here, and trust takes time. And then we're going to have to lean on our community and lean on our support networks and take it one idea at a time. What steps today can I take to get my license? And then where can I go to apply to a job the next day? If we rush these things and get impatient, it can impact our recovery. So we have to just take it one moment at a time.
I think that's fantastic advice. That was my tagline coming in, that I just came up with today when I said it's summertime. I'm feeling fine, and we live one day at a time. I was walking home from lunch to do this interview, and that came to my mind. I'm like, I'm saying that, but you're right. One day at a time is a great way to live. I remember this song lyric that used to say, "We live for the moment." It makes sense, don't it? And it does. It makes sense. You got to be present, and it's not as easy as it sounds sometimes, but yeah, one day at a time. So, Maddie, I want to thank you so much for going on, or for coming on the show. Before we get off here, I do want to encourage everyone to go check out the Recovery Couch Inner Circle on Patreon. We have behind the scenes bonus content, live Q&As. You can find out a lot more about what we're doing here at the Recovery Couch, at the Recovery Couch Inner Circle on Patreon. Don't forget to check out everything you got going on. Maddie, tell them again where they can find you.
www.jesupport.org, and thank you for listening.
God bless you all, and we'll see you next time. You always have a seat right here on the Recovery Couch. True Story Media believes that your story matters. At True Story Media, we help you share your story through podcasting, consulting, coaching, and more. Whether you're building a brand, launching a podcast, or finding your voice, we'll guide you every step of the way. Learn more at www.recoverycouch.com. Wow. That was an incredible conversation with Maddie Andrews. Maddie's story is a reminder that no matter how heavy our past or complex our struggles, recovery is possible. From the ICU to advocacy, Maddie has shown us what it looks like to face pain, confront the reasons behind addiction, and turn it into a mission to help others. If you take one thing away from her story, let it be this: you are never too far gone, and every single step forward counts. I want to thank you so much for listening to The Recovery Couch. Don't forget, go check out our Patreon page, The Recovery Couch Inner Circle, where we share behind-the-scenes bonus content, live Q&As, and much more. Also, go and buy my book, Step 4, A Journey Through Addiction, so you can have a better understanding of my story and why I have a heart to help others. Keep showing up. Keep leaning on community. Thank you for listening to The Recovery Couch. Until next time, remember, you always have a seat right here on The Recovery Couch.